Can I begin, as others have done, by congratulating those who have organised this petition, Make Votes Matter and other organisations. It's no mean feat to get 100,000 signatures to this place, and I hope very much that this is the start of the next phase of a push for reform in our voting system in this country. And as the events of the next few years unravel and we go through Brexit, we will see constitutional upheaval anyway. And in the midst of that, I think we can seize an opportunity to try and improve our democratic system. The Scottish National Party supports the petitioners. Indeed, we have long argued for proportional representation. We have done so, and we have tried to give it effect in our own national parliament. And for as long as we are represented in the Union Parliament, we will press the case for reform here as well. And we do that, ironically, even though we are probably the greatest beneficiaries of the distortion of the current system. We had what now looks like a very freak result in 2015, where on 50% of the vote, we achieved 95% of the seats. That's not a good system. I know that, and we know that as a party. And if the price that needs to be paid for having a fair voting system in this country is that I and some of my colleagues do not get to return to this place, then that, to my mind, is a price worth paying. And I do think that all of us should be discussing this from the point of view of political principle rather than what is good for our individual party.
Hear, hear.
So, Roger, the simple proposition we are debating here is, should the parties in Westminster be represented in proportion to the votes they receive at the election? It seems to me that that is such an overwhelmingly reasonable and correct proposition that it is very difficult to argue against. No wonder, therefore, that in opinion polling, vast majorities of people say that they agree with that proposition. And this is also the case why those who disagree with the proposition do not argue its opposite. Because I've not heard anyone stand up and say, we think that political parties in Westminster should not have representation in line with the votes that were cast for them in the election. And instead of that, we get treated to well, you know, nothing's really perfect. We know you mean well, but here are a whole series of technical obfuscations which take us away from the debate in principle and try and get into a situation that confuses the electorate. And I think we need to return to principle and try and make sure that we focus on that debate. I want to just deal briefly with three of the arguments that have been put against. The first is the proposition that proportional representation somehow doesn't lead to stable government, and of course that first past the post does. I don't want to repeat the arguments that have been made about the experience of recent elections, but I do want to say that I think there is a confusion here between the majority government of one party and majority government. Coalition government is majority government in that it has to have a majority of members of Parliament supporting the coalition in order for it to get anything through. In fact, many of the criticisms I would have of it, the Conservative, Liberal, Democrat coalition government from 2010 to 15 was remarkably stable and was able to put its programme through. So people are confused, and to argue that the important thing about the system is that it should deliver a majority for one party rather than deliver a government which has the majority of the electorate behind it seems to me a misguided and indefensible position. There's also been a suggestion that, PR will lead to a system where the electors actually lose power because power will be handed to political managers, to party managers, deals will be done in smoke-filled rooms or whatever the 21st century equivalent is of smoke-filled rooms. And that isn't really the case neither, is it? The truth is that what will happen is, if you have a proportional system, is that people will be obliged to form a government, and they will do so. They can only form a government if it has the support of the majority of people who took part in the election. And that seems to me absolutely fundamentally democratic, rather than the current system, where on 43% of the vote, the Conservative Party and its junior coalition partner have formed a government with just 43% of the vote. The third and final point I want to address is this idea of the constituency link, that somehow proportional representation weakens the constituency link. This, I think, is nonsense also. And members opposite said that, you know, we all as MPs, we do try and represent people without fear of favour. It doesn't matter whether they voted for us or not. And of course that's true. And I genuinely believe that all of us do actually do that. But I don't think the electors who come to our door believe that that's the case. I think in many ways they would rather have someone who they would believe would be more empathetic to their case because they might agree with the difficulty in which they're in. And if, for example, someone comes, has an immigration problem, are they likely to seek support from an elected representative who has made public statements about the need for tighter immigration controls and the need for crackdowns? Well, perhaps it might put them off. And if you have an STV system where you have, say in the case of Edinburgh, for example, 5 MPs still elected, but each one representing the whole city on an STV basis, then any elector has got the opportunity to go to any one of them with a particular case. And you actually enhance, you widen the constituency link because you make it more likely that people will seek help from their Member of Parliament. There are 14 million people who didn't vote on June the 8th this year. And I seriously think we all need to be aware of that and a little bit more concerned about that than what we appear to be. And one of the reasons why they didn't vote, I believe, is because of our electoral system. And let me illustrate this by example. Suspend disbelief, if you will, and imagine I'm a Conservative supporter in Newcastle upon Tyne. I'm 58 years old, which I am, and for all of my life I have argued support for the Conservative Party. I have went out and I have voted Conservative. I have participated in 10 general elections. And I have never, ever once been able to vote for somebody who then would be elected to represent my views. And what's worse, the party that I support has said they're not at all concerned about that, and they've offered me some sort of compensation by saying, well, at the other end of the country it happens in reverse, so don't worry. But I'm not sure that a barrister or a banker in the home counties actually will have the Conservative approach to the North East that I'm trying to argue for. Now, if you're an activist, you might put up with that level of frustration. But I think many of our fellow citizens have just given up in the process. They simply do not, I won't because I'm very short of time, they simply do not see the point of voting in elections and therefore they decline to do so. So we have to see changing the electoral system as part of a process of democratic renewal in the governance of these islands that will address the point of people being alienated from the system. And if we don't do that, I really fear for the future of these institutions of which we all participate. So, Roger, just in the final minute, I wanted to address this question of the referendum, the 2011 referendum, because I really find I'm grateful, actually. Twice I asked those who were talking about it to confirm whether or not they thought it was a referendum in PR, and at least they have the good grace to concede that it is not. We have never, ever had a referendum on proportional representation in this country. I don't know what was going on in that coalition talks or why the Liberal Democrats got themselves into a position of agreeing to that referendum on AV, which was a policy they didn't agree with, and which actually blocked the debate for the rest of that Parliament probably up until now. But that is history. But it is certainly not the case that that referendum in 2011 should be taken as an endorsement for anything whatsoever. And it is the case, I make this as an observation, that many of the biggest changes in our franchise and in our democratic voting system have not been because of referenda in any event. We didn't have a referendum to give women the vote. We didn't have a referendum to lower the age of majority to 21 and then to 18. In fact, Parliament decided it was the right thing to do. So there's not even any need for a referendum. So, Roger, the experience in Scotland is very positive of the operation of PR, not just at local government, but at our national parliament as well. And if you actually look at people in Scotland, there is a wide degree of support now for the existence of the Scottish Parliament. Even the party opposite has come round to being an advocate for it. Much more support than there was at the time that it was set up. And I think that's part because of some of the things that it's done, but it's also in part because people feel that it is genuinely a body which represents the plurality of opinion in Scotland. And that gives it a safety net. That gives it the credibility which it needs to be able to get on and act on their behalf. That is a safety net and a big dose of credibility that we could do with in this Parliament as well.
Hear, hear.